Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you to our first Homebrew submission tier list. Now, for those of you who missed it, I have been running a bit of a home brewery system for a lot of folks in the recent couple of weeks. Essentially, I set up a drive both on our Discord and on our post channel for the YouTube to go over some stuff that people wanted to showcase on the channel. So I kind of want to make this into a channel tradition. I want to see and I want to start encouraging showcasing 40K and other types of homebrew and talking about people's ideas. Now, as mentioned, these were collected off of the Discord and also off of our posts on the channel. Important note, artwork for this is on provision of the creator, so if people didn't provide artwork, I kind of mingled a couple things together, but otherwise it's been sourced from reference material, and I've referenced the people who need to be referenced at the end. Another thing important, since we normally do scoring for these types of videos, the scoring, again, since it's people's homebrew, it's not meant to denigrate anyone's idea, but rather just a general feel of how I see the homebrew. Maybe I see some flaws in it, maybe I see some particularly good aspects, but it is areas of improvement or recognition of well-rounded ideas rather than denigration or negative reflection on the person who made it, obviously. So, since we are doing military equipment units and homebrew in general, we have a little bit of a different rating system for this. We have role fulfillment, essentially how well does the idea fit into the setting and or the niche of its faction that it's trying to fill. These are all out of 10. Logistics, how reasonable or logical is the design? AKA, is there something blatantly wrong with it? Is there some hurdles that have to be done logically for it to work out? And would a faction be able to field this at all? Is it reasonable for them to field? And then finally, style and flavor. Again, this is a subjective metric. Was it well thought out, and was there a lot of good ideas or details within it? So, again, this is a video. I'm not able to put every single detail that everyone shared with me. A lot of them are public. Other ones have now been put on our Discord. But with that said and out of the way, let's get right into it with the Ordo Reductor Mark V Piaxen's support platform. Now, this is one of 3 gun tuna designs that we have submitted. Several people put together multiple different submissions for this, but let's start out with this one. The Ordo Reductor Mark V support platform is a layer shielded, so multiple layers of shields, both refractor and void, or similar. It is a gravity weight negated, layer shielded, self-propelled gun. It is roughly twice the size of a heavy Malkador tank. So I've picked the Malkador tank destroyer and kind of this Ordo Reductor ordnance platform as a good reference, because there is no artwork of this one, obviously, because it comes out of people's heads. It is very large. Arguably, this is a super heavy support platform, especially with the armament that it is equipped with, which is why it belongs to the Order Reductor, the part of the Mechanicus responsible for really area saturation and reduction of enemy, whatever it may be, usually hive structures. As per that reason, it is intended as a multi-role Titan-grade anti-structure and siege-breaker weapon. It is capable of reducing both hives and the fortresses associated with hives. So, if you needed structures like hive walls taken care of, if you needed areas of habbing or various pieces of large-scale infrastructure removed, this is a weapon that could effectively be used to achieve that. One other important thing, because this is such a large vehicle, again, super heavy in size, practically double the size of a Malkador heavy tank, it has a gravity weight negation, which for the Adeptus Mechanicus essentially means that in addition to being a treaded design, a tracked design, there is a generator inside of the vehicle providing it with a little bit of reverse gravity lift, keeping it from essentially collapsing in on itself or breaking the ground underneath it, and making it a little bit easier for the vehicle to move at all and have a decent level of mobility over difficult terrain. The important part of any support platform, let's be honest, is the armament, and it has some pretty significant armament on the front end, so to speak. For infantry, it has a fairly standard suite, double-paired sponson weapons, including autocannons, phosphor blasters, and or similar heavy weapons. It kind of just has this double-treaded design like this, and it has 4 weapons on each side in 2 separate sponsons. Again, very, very similar to the Baneblade in terms of layout, though I would assume that these sponsons can both go 180 degrees or something close to it, maybe 160 degrees. Again, this is a support platform, not a tank. It is very well armored, but it isn't really designed for direct combat, as most of its primary weapons are not really flexible in the way that a normal tank gun would be. So it has that for anti-infantry, kind of a medium quad heavy weapon or medium support weapon type equipment. Its real variants, and honestly its primary armament, is what delineates the variants on this vehicle. The primary one, the more normal one, is the artillery roll, the actual support platform artillery, which includes a 280mm super heavy gun. It is fairly analogous to Atomic Annie in terms of caliber. Again, it's a 280mm long, super heavy gun. It is able to transport itself, so it doesn't need any rail or anything, so it's the ability to move what would really be a super heavy artillery piece, quite similar to the Baneblade's primary cannon. With the enhanced ammunition, it has a range of over 30 kilometers, and the ability to fire an incredibly heavy, high explosive, or various other types of shells. Now, the main advantage of this big, long-range gun is the ability to fire indirect. None of the other weapons in this lineup are able to fire indirect, and thus as a pure support weapon, the 280 is the standard, because that is going to give you the ability to outrange and overmatch enemy artillery pieces. So again, it's meant to destroy hives, fortresses, other places that have their own defensive heavy artillery. So in order to use a weapon, they need to have something that both outranges that and has significantly more wallop to it, which the 280mm definitely does. The next one up is the Knight Magna Cannon. Now, it is a Magna Lance cannon, kind of the same one that is on the Knight Cerastus or Acastus. I'm pretty sure it's the Cerastus, or the Acastus, whichever one. It is essentially something a bit between a super heavy version of a las cannon and a volcano cannon. I think it's just a little bit short of the volcano cannon. But again, the big difference between this and the super heavy gun is simply the fact that it is locked, aka it can't fire in direct. It has a little bit more nuance to how the weapon is going to operate, because of course, unlike a gun which just needs to be loaded, the Magna Cannon or the Magna Lance Cannon does need to recharge, and it can also overheat. I mean, you can overheat a super heavy gun, but it's a lot more difficult. And the Knight Magna Cannon is a little bit more anti-tank. Obviously, the 280mm can be anti-tank, but it has some limitations. Obviously, the biggest one is you can miss. With the Magna Cannon, it's a lot harder to miss because you're not firing something that has a firing arc, you're firing a direct line shot. But that also means that it can't really be used as artillery. It can be used to blow through lots of targets and strike something in a straight line, but it cannot be used to go over enemy defenses. For example, firing against a hive wall, it would have to fire straight through the wall instead of trying to hit something behind it. Not saying that it can't blast through that type of defense, it's just that it would have to go through anything that is between it and its target, rather than being able to bombard it like the super heavy gun would. And then finally, it has a short-range option, and I kind of put short-range in quotes here. It is a 600mm single-shot rocket. All of these are equipped with variable ammunition, including maybe some limited nuclear shells, flammable shells, phosphorus, high explosive, obviously, and a limited version of anti-tank. Again, the Magna Cannon has no variable ammunition, but super heavy guns actually can have quite a few different types of ammo. For example, with rail guns in our modern day, or rather in the 40s, railway guns had the ability to use either high explosive shells or anti-concrete shells. I would imagine that the super heavy gun, much like the Baneblade cannon, would have various specialty ammunition equipped to it. The 600mm rocket, on the other hand, is a bit like a short and nasty ICBM. It has none of the range and none of the maneuverability, to be honest, of an actual missile, but it has the absolute wallop that none of the other options have. Granted, with its weight, you can only fire a certain distance. Consider this something like the Raketenwerfer from World War II, or even the Sturmpanzer, or the Sturmtiger, rather, that massive, short-range, rocket-assisted shell that is just there to absolutely decimate large portions of urban terrain. Now, this has to get relatively close to the target in order to fire, because of course accuracy problems with a weapon that big, with that short of kind of a lead up time in terms of its velocity with the rocket motor, you need to get pretty close, honestly dangerously close compared to the 30 plus kilometers that you can be away with the 280 mil. So this is kind of a drive up to an enemy gatehouse or to an enemy barracks or stronghold or fastness and just launch this at point blank range and delete everything in a certain distance. It does most of its damage through sheer kinetic explosive power. Finally, moving on to the armor. The armor for this thing, as you might expect for a weapon this expensive and this complicated, is vast. Not only does it have the multiple layered shielding that we went over, again, void or something close to void, and then refractors, which is fairly standard for several different types of Mechanicus vehicles, and will be standard for all of Guntuna's creations for these. It also has some of the thickest armor that we will see on basically this entire list. It is essentially a 1-to-1 with the Baneblade, except it has a slightly different ratio. 200 millimeters of armor, again, same thickness as the Baneblade, but instead of the Baneblade's central adamantium and then fronted and backed with ceramite, or the reverse, essentially sandwiched, this vehicle has a 50-50 with a composite on the exterior and adamantium on the rear with a 50-50 ratio. So 100 millimeters of ceramite on the fronting, 100 millimeters of adamantium on the rear. There is a reason for that, and the most obvious one is that energy weapons, having infinite ammo and being fairly common, you'll want to have an energy-resistant material on the exterior, not to mention that energy adjacent things like jets of molten copper or heat warheads, hunter-killer missiles, etc., the ceramite would want to take that damage first and deform, melt, and thermally resist it so that the much thicker layer of adamantium doesn't weaken with repeat hits. So having it backed by adamantium gives it a lot more flexibility, gives it more longevity, and even though it is incredibly expensive and unbelievably heavy, it gives it very similar, if not a little better, depending on your opinion, armor protection to the Baneblade, in addition to being shielded. Let's get to the ratings. Again, as I mentioned, this and the next three that come up are all Guntunas. Role fulfillment. Now, as a Mechanicus vehicle, I think it fulfills its role rather well. As a support artillery vehicle, something that the Mechanicus aren't really shown to have a lot of. I mean, self-propelled artillery is something that is pretty much an Imperial Guard standard, and base artillery, like towed artillery, while it exists within the Adeptus Mechanicus, we don't see it very often. And you would expect an organization like the Order Reductor to have a super heavy gun like this. So I think that in role fulfillment terms, it works perfectly. The only complaint that I really have is the massive difference that its weapons actually make. So whether it's equipped with certain types of side weapons is kind of irrelevant. Whether it's got paired heavy bolters, quad heavy bolters, phosphor blasters, or autocannons, that's a little irrelevant. But what is very relevant is whether it's equipped with a super heavy gun, a Magna las cannon, or a rocket. If it has the rocket, that's only one shot. If it gets one shot off and then essentially has to go through the process of rearming something the size of an ICBM, that is significantly limiting to it fulfilling its role as a support weapon. See, it does its job, but it has to fall back out of combat once it does so. The 280mm gun, on the other hand, that can continuously do its job from a significant distance, and arguably it could assist in taking down really heavy defenses over a long period of time and be more precise than just a single-shot rocket. Again, you could reload the rocket, but I think that takes a significant amount of time. The Magna Cannon is another just kind of odd one. I understand the mentality here, especially when it comes to open field battle, or when it comes to, say, parking on a ridge line a significant distance away from an enemy hive, and then beginning to delete sections of wall. but I don't really see it as much of an advantage over the super heavy gun. The only advantage that I see for the Magna Cannon over the super heavy gun is that anti-tank ability. The fact that the Magna Cannon can fire for longer periods of time, can take down shields more consistently, and doesn't have a chance to miss, or has a significantly lower chance to miss. I think that gives it that little bit of utility that justifies it really being part of this vehicle. Logistics-wise, I give it a 4. Again, it's the Mechanicus. There's a lot of complicated technology, but this is stacking on a lot. You have a custom-made chassis. You have a custom-made weapon system in terms of the super heavy gun. You have a custom-made and unique ammunition type in terms of the rocket. You have a very custom and very expensive system of propulsion and armor and armament. However, again, Order Reductor. They have access to a lot of the stuff, and a lot of the pieces and the overall design and construction is a little bit poached from other vehicle designs. So, for example, there are a lot of 30K vehicles which have a similar layout to this support platform. So, I just knock it 1 point off for the fact that it has so much expense and would be practically impossible to field in large numbers, and it has a significant logistics trail whether you are trying to feed the main gun or feed it more rockets. So, big problem there. Repairing it, not too bad, but still worse than a Baneblade in terms of the fact that it has much more complicated and expensive subsystems that are inherently arcane. For style, lore, and flavor, I love this. This is a great pick for the Order Reductor. I give it a 7 out of 10 for sure. Again, flavor-wise, I definitely like the idea that it's filling in its niche. It is a weapon that is born of the 31st millennium for sure. It works off that ancient design, it messes around with different types of shielding, different types of weaponry, and the fact that it mixes night weapons and fire-and-forget weapons with a more standard and traditional tubed artillery piece, rather than relying on energy weapons or plasma, I definitely prefer, because I am not a big fan of giant plasma weapons, just because of the inherent flaws in their design and the opportunity cost of maybe exploding. So, really solid there. I would love to see this used, like, in context, because I would really like to see how it functions, especially with the absolutely psychotic idea of rolling right up to enemy defenses with a 600mm rocket and just deleting them from existence and obliterating them as a whole. But yeah, really solid first outing. Moving on to one that I really was excited for, the Legio Cybernetica Gladiator class Automata. Now this is a battle droid, quote-unquote. It is a battle automata of the Adeptus Mechanicus. It's a heavy, multi-role invasion and close combat automata. Now, invasion, it includes two different things. Either it can be teleported into a combat zone, or it can be teleported onto an enemy ship. It's teleported to its attack point either alone or in small groups. It can be used as a bodyguard or as a hunter-killer, but that's usually going to be in conjunction with its actual deployment. For example, if you were deploying this to a planetary capital, it could be doing the job of a hunter-killer while also doing the job of an invasion and close combat automata. It is designed for combat in open areas of a ship just because it is so large. It's built off of that Thanatar-sized automata design, so very tall, very large, significantly bigger than a Space Marine. It would not be able to fit inside of a standard ship, inside of the hallways. But if it were teleported to an open space, such as the Enginarium or the bridge, using its strong data tethering systems, it could effectively take over those areas because no one's really able to overcome it with the weapons that are aboard in those areas. And in the Enginarium, the gun decks, and the bridge, there is space for one of these gladiator-class automata to move around and effectively do combat. Now, its armament is pretty extensive and very unique, considering how most battle automata are not equipped with complicated melee weapons. The first one that you have is kind of the pintle equivalent for this vehicle, or really robot, and that is a phosphor blaster, kind of a heavy phosphor blaster up here on the shoulder, and it uses a servo arm to move around. So, again, coming back to the idea that this is heavily data tethered by a priest, it is under direct control a majority of the time to increase its efficacy and decrease any idle time between attacks and targeting. Having this phosphor blaster servo arm allows it to clear its own back, to scratch its own back, to keep away enemy infantry, and also theoretically to be used as a support weapon for other units. Again, this can be deployed in squads, so lighting up a dark area or targeting or tagging enemy units with the Phosphor Blaster for allies is a solid plan. Its primary weapon, however, is paired heavy transonic blades. Again, transonic blades have the ability to sink into other materials a certain distance. They resonate at a certain frequency, parting other materials at a very tight atomic level. These are massive. They are almost 4 feet long, basically. So not only does it have the ability to grab, grasp, and cut enemies, it can also stab through materials. For example, boarding doors or sections of shipping, it can cut its way through. Again, I don't think this is an effective way for it to get around on a ship, for example, because of the sheer fact that it would have to be cutting every few feet in order to make its massive bulk shown. But in terms of overcoming enemy armor and theoretically breaching the hull and venting everyone out into space, it's perfectly reasonable. And of course, the transonic blade is not terrible in terms of an actual melee weapon against other enemy melee weapons, especially for a creature this large. And then it has a significant extra weapon, other than the optional hunter-killer missiles, which on this design I'm not exactly sure where they would go. I think the best option would either be to try and stick them into the back-mounted missile rack, or to stick them onto the off-shoulder of the machine. But the primary ranged weapon is that back-mounted missile rack. I'm going to keep saying missile rack, my bad. And it has, if I count right, somewhere between 12 and 20 missiles. These are, again, able to target, and they're able to shoot up at an angle and then angle themselves down at said target. These are of much varieties, as you would expect: phosphorus, armor penetrating, hunter killer, whatever type they would find themselves needing to be equipped with, including, I would expect, fragmentation to be very common, or just regular high explosive, because of course we are fighting in a ship, and if we don't want to space everyone, it would not be a smart idea to just be firing around a dozen or so crack missiles. And of course, what use is a crack missile if it's just going to concuss everyone around it and not actually do a lot of damage? Fragmentation seems to be the go-to, in my opinion. Unless, of course, you're fighting in a large hangar area where you expect to be attacked by enemy vehicles of some kind. Or if you're dropping down onto a planet and doing battle with the enemy in the open streets. Its armor, again, is that same combination of automantic shielding that exists on a lot of robots and vehicles for the Mechanicus, that automatic refractor fields, and then that void shield. Guntoon refers to it as a construct shield. It is quite similar to that, essentially that external extra shielding that acts like a void shield, as opposed to the automantic shielding that it also has. In addition to all of that double shielding, it has slab ceramite over adamantium plating, again, very similar to what we would see from a lot of other robots, like the Castellan. This is much thicker. It's particularly up-armored because it is a close combat servitor designed for open warfare and not a bodyguard all the time type of servitor, and it is a hunter-killer, so it needs to be relatively well protected. In terms of this, it is around 50 millimeters, maybe a little bit more on the shoulders, possibly on the chest as well. Think of the armor profile as similar to a Space Marine. The joints are still going to be uncovered, but it is going to be protected by around 50 millimeters most places. And the breakdown for this is around 10-ish millimeters of ceramite over 40 millimeters of adamantium plating. So very much erring on the side of adamantium here, just because all metal and then a little bit of ceramite goes a long way. The concern here is more about heavy infantry weapons, so heavy infantry energy weapons are not as much of a problem. So the adamantium is the preference, and given the fact that these are so expensive and they are expected to be returned and recalled, joined by the fact that they can be recalled via teleportarum, means that you're very likely going to be able to get these back. So while the normal problems with adamantium, aka repairing and reforging it, still apply, it is a bit less of a problem because you always expect to be able to get this gladiator-type servitor, battle automata back. In terms of roll fulfillment, I give it a 6. The Mechanicus have a lot of different units that fulfill this role in terms of like assault, hunter, killer, etc., but they don't really have any that perfectly fit it like as an all-rounder. The Gladiator would work as an all-rounder, but doesn't have any particular specialty that the others don't. I mean, you have Sakaran Ruststalkers if you want a melee unit. You have the big, long, leggy Sniper Boys if you want to have a pure hunter-killer unit. You have Patroxy if you want to have an asymmetrical surprise attack unit. Granted, there's not a lot of instances of teleportation being used by the Mechanicus. I mean, we know that they have it, they have to have it, and there are examples of them being very good, or there's theoretical examples of them being very good at taking over enemy shipping, teleportarum strikes, whether it be entering via umbilical or anything else. At least it's more likely in their case to be it is very likely in their case to be a teleportarum strike, especially if they're using something like this. So I think it fulfills the role well. There are just other things that I think also would fulfill the role or partially fulfill the role. So it gets a 6 on that. It's definitely not bad at its job. I just kind of see it as a little bit much, especially given the fact that it is going to be so expensive to make these. You gotta imagine how heavy these are and how expensive it is to not only have all of this armor, equipment, and weaponry in one package, but then to hurl that through a teleportarum, which is dangerous and inherently risky to do, and then to theoretically have any issues with that. It's just a lot of investment, where there are other units that could theoretically do the job. I think there's definitely a place for it, but again, that also leads into logistics. Logistics-wise, it's not impossible. Again, it's nearing the edge of what the Adeptus Mechanicus can really do in terms of creating this type of heavy battle automata. These are some of the most expensive and impressive machines that the Mechanicus have access to. Many of the machines that are similar to the Gladiator are straight up one-offs, like they are unable to be made and are simply maintained. Now, it is implied that this is something that can be made, or at least can be partially made. So, with that in mind, none of the weaponry here is particularly incredibly complex or unique. The transonic blades, however, are bigger than most other transonic blades. In fact, they're basically almost double the size of the ones for Skitarii, depending on what length you want to look at. If you say that it's running the whole length of their arm, then that's a different story, but those are massive. The missiles, while I understand the idea of mounting them on the back, you gotta also understand that that is a very complicated way of launching missiles. And even the Mechanicus, when they use missile racks or missile launchers, for example, on the Dune Crawlers, sorry, not the Dune Crawlers, on the other Mechanicus tank, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting the name. Whatever it is. But yeah, it's the Onager Dune Crawler, and the other one is I am forgetting the name. Whatever it is, the little hover tank that they have. That also has missiles, but they fire forward. So having ones that have to go directly up and then turn downward is a little bit more complicated, and would just make producing this thing and having it function be a lot more logistically difficult. So again, it's reaching the very edge of what the Mechanicus can do, but because it all is all technically stuff that they can do, I give it a solid 6. It's getting up there, but it's not past the point of feasibility in total. Style Lord flavor, I really like this. Again, even given the fact that it has multiple different things that can do its job, or that can assist it in doing its job, or theoretically do its job differently, having a big, hulking melee servitor is very interesting, and very 30k, I must honestly say. There are a lot of interesting units that we lost during the Heresy, and this honestly is quite the blast from the past in a lot of cases. It kind of reminds me of the Charnable Ogrins, who'd be equipped with big melee weapons and servitor harnesses, and they'd be used as berserker melee troops. Again, I don't think this is going to be nearly as violent. It seems much more directly controlled by the data tether, but even with that, it's a very loreful unit, and I think it would fit in well with a lot of the other Thalax and other Ordo Cybernetica or Legione Cybernetica units as kind of their off-color unit, or their off-color brother. The dude who chooses melee instead of ranged combat, because a lot of them, like the Thanatar, are very much ranged, and while this is similar in size to the Thanatar, it is decidedly using melee as its primary weapon, so I like it. It's a big one, but it is also a robot. So, to a little bit of a mismatch here, I had to cobble together a turret for this thing. We get to the Lithobolos Light Tank Destroyer. Now, this is a fast, light, tracked tank destroyer. It is designed for anti-tank harassment. So it's not a pure tank destroyer. It's definitely more of a combination between light tank and tank destroyer, given the things that it's equipped with and the weaponry and armor that it has. Anti-tank harassment, kind of the idea is it rolls up really, really quickly to a target, fires quickly, knocks out 1 to 2 heavily armored vehicles, and then backs off. It also works very well as a scout. It is very fast. And it is relatively low in terms of armor because it relies pretty heavily upon its refractor field, refractor field void shield combo that we've talked about before. The same combination that's been used for each of these Mechanicus builds so far. The idea that the void shield is covering the outer external, and then the refractor or the automatic shielding is reactive and doing its own thing. Again, if you want to look at the difference between fields, you can go watch my shield video, which I've already made. It is, however, absolutely frickin' enormous for a light tank destroyer. It is the size of a heavy tank. It is arguably similar in size to the Lehman Russ. It's massive, has a huge profile, has a massive weapons cache, and is a very tall vehicle, mostly because a lot of Mechanicus vehicles are tall like this. It is, again, often used by the Order Reductor as an escort, which, again, makes a lot of sense. They don't want to have their big, expensive vehicles, like the first one we talked about, the support platform, getting knocked out by enemy armor. They also don't want to have to use its primary weapon on enemy armor, because it's more expensive than those are worth. So having a Lithobolos, this light tank / light tank destroyer, this harassment vehicle around in little squadrons of 2 to 3 per heavy gun makes a lot of sense, because they can go scout, find enemy armor, knock out the enemy armor, keep them at a distance, and effectively suppress any enemy armored resistance. The armament for this is fairly reasonable. It has a paired phosphor blaster, again, as a pintle, so kind of a lighter anti-infantry option. It could theoretically be armed with other things, but I honestly think that the phosphor blaster is the most reasonable one in terms of a lot of these vehicles, because, well, they need a lot of targeting assists, depending upon the situation. Of course, the Mechanicus have their own auspex and things of that nature, but having the Phosphor Blaster allows you to identify especially armor much more easily, because if you fire the Phosphor Blaster, it's like firing tracers at a tank. If they skirt off or spray or stick to the armor, then you can easily identify tank forward, and if there was some sort of thing where the enemy was hiding from you or was difficult for you to identify, the Phosphor Blaster would allow you to hose them down and identify them very quickly. But its primary weapon is its main anti-tank option, which is paired neutron lasers. Again, neutron lasers are effectively just a significantly improved las cannon, a little bit extra range and significantly more armor penetration and pure power. Spit all the way through a Lehman Russ tank instead of just penetrating the front hull and messing up the guts. So the paired neutron lasers again allow two things. It allows it to fire one shot and then fire another one while the other gun is reloading. However, it also gives you the option, if you come across truly heavy armor, I mean, one neutron laser shot would probably knock out a Lehman Russ tank, but if you came across Malcadors, if you came across heavily energy protected vehicles like Knights or little Scout Knights or anything of that nature, Armigers, or even something heavy like a Baneblade, you could theoretically either give it a 1-2 to knock out the shielding and then hit the vehicle, or you could fire both of them at the same time to knock out a heavier shield, like an ion shield, or in order to fire and do more physical damage. For example, if you fired one neutron laser at a Baneblade, it might barely penetrate with one, but if you fired either 1-2 or fired them at the same position, there's a higher chance of actually doing some post-armor penetration damage with the neutron laser. Its armor is relatively light, as you might expect, the Lithobolus, again, being a light vehicle. It also has some of that anti-grav tech built into it, again, just to give it that much more mobility, given its sheer size over terrain. It is, again, a ceramite adamantium weave mesh. The weave mesh, the adamantium, is about 15 millimeters, which again doubles in terms of kinetic and energy resistance, and then the ceramite is 35 millimeters. Again, it's ceramite external, adamantium internal. I went with mesh or with weave mesh in this because if you've ever looked at the modern armor of the, say, M1 Abrams tank, it's not any solid layers of things like depleted uranium. It actually uses a depleted uranium weave or a depleted uranium mesh. Some others use bars or use layers. But I like the mesh idea because the idea is that essentially it will catch kinetic impacts, while the Ceramite deals with something like a high energy weapon. So I think that's perfectly reasonable. That will definitely proof you the same way that like 100 millimeters of standard steel armor would against enemy heavy infantry weaponry and some light anti-tank weaponry as well. I mean, you still don't want to go up against vehicle anti-tank weapons. This is a light vehicle after all. That's not what it's meant for. Getting hit by Lehman Russ battle cannons, for example, probably not a solid plan. Enemy las cannons, again, not a solid plan, but infantry held plasma gun or a hotshot anything or maybe a really, really out of power multi laser or something like that, it's going to be able to resist those very, very well, which is all that you really need for a vehicle like this. Role fulfillment wise, this is kind of where it comes in for a bit of slagging. Role fulfillment, I think the idea of having a light tank destroyer like this is really difficult to justify. See, here's my reasoning. The Mechanicus have a bunch of forces that have absolutely zero problems with running kilometers on kilometers and will never get tired and can move faster than a lot of the vehicles that this is supposed to be supplanting. So the idea is essentially that this will be going around other heavy assets and protecting them from flanking maneuvers. The Scutari can already kind of do that, and they have their own anti-tank weapons, again, depending on whether you want to look at plasma or melta weapons or even anti-tank missiles. So while I don't see it as kind of a total nothing, like there are other vehicles that do its job, sure, I don't see it as a total loss. I do think that even something like an Honor Dragoon Crawler could still do the job of the Lithobolus light tank. You would just have to be a little bit smarter about how you deployed them. The main thing with the Lithobolus is its speed. It's the ability to move quickly and knock out enemy tanks easily. If you are just thinking about moving quickly and knocking out enemy tanks, you could use aircraft for that. And the other thing is, this is the Mechanicus. They have access to, if nothing else, a lot of time. And they don't have to treat the enemy with the same respect that the Imperial Guard do. They could quite easily say that any battlefield that they are on, they are in more control of than the enemy is. So having a light scout vehicle like this, while in some scenarios might be justified, I feel like either infantry or other vehicles that the Mechanicus have simply fill that role more effectively and significantly more cheaply. Again, this has double the armament of a standard Dune Crawler, and similar protection levels. Again, I think with the double shielding and with this adamantium weave mesh, it might be a little bit better protected, but it's comparable, and you're talking about something that might cost 2 times as much as a Dune Crawler for simply an increase in speed. You know, it's questionable in that way. I think you could justify it, but I just don't see it as being necessarily a perfect fit for the role. Logistically, again, it feeds into the same problems. It's expensive, it's massive. That's the other thing. It's very, very large in terms of frame, making it not very stealthy. Again, there are modifications done to it to make it stealthier. A little bit of camellia line, a little bit of smoke, a little bit of this and that, auspex jammers and things of that nature, but you can put as much noon spheric interference as you want on this thing. Enemies will still be able to identify something this large unless you are in urban terrain. In urban terrain, I think that is one of the places where this would shine best because of its firepower, because of its all-around armor, and because of its speed. But outside of urban terrain, in open terrain, it would have to act far more like a light tank destroyer than like a scout. So logistically, it's very expensive. It's got double the armament of a lot of other vehicles. It's got very expensive armor, and it has that double shielding issue that we talked about before. In addition to that, is not nearly as well armored as the other vehicles that we've talked about, or even the automata that we've talked about. So knocking out the Lithobolus light tank destroyer is far more simple than knocking out any of the other vehicles, and if you knock out a significant amount of investment. This thing is expensive. It is difficult to replace because of the complexity in its design and the expense in its design. So logistically, I feel like the idea of having to replace one of these would be almost twice as expensive as trying to replace a different vehicle doing a similar job. Style and flavor-wise, it's great. I mean, I like light tanks. I'm a big fan of light tank destroyers. I'm a big fan of like neutron laser type destroyers, things that are very light, very flexible, very mobile. I like the idea of it as a ranging scout. But of course, since it is so expensive, there are problems with that. Of course, you don't want to have like a Panzer V doing scouting jobs when a Panzer II will do the job just fine. In the anti-tank role, yeah, it does its job. Honestly, double neutron lasers is a little bit of overkill. I mean, it's not quite to the level of killing Titans and Baneblades, and yet it's not nearly too little to get rid of heavy tanks. It could scratch heavy tanks easily, and so even one of them could probably do that. Two is a little bit much. But I understand the concept, especially if this is not going to be deployed in large squads. It needs to have that 1-2 shot. So I think it's reasonable. I think that it has no real problems in terms of the overall design that I was described. The armor protection, it's good. It's good. It's definitely what I would think of for a light tank. Honestly, if you're talking about light vehicles, I never put the armor above a certain amount. Again, I've gone over that with vehicles in general. I don't put it above that. 50 millimeters is really generous for a light tank, especially one this big. You gotta remember, this is practically the size of the Lehman Russ tank, and even armor to that much, it's going to weigh easily over 40 tons. And that is disgustingly heavy for a light tank. That is obese for a light tank. That's 4 times as expensive, or as weight-wise as costly as a standard light tank would be. Granted, it makes up for it in a lot of ways, but still, there are certain things that this will not be able to do. Crossing certain types of bridges, making its way over certain terrain pieces. Again, it has the anti-grav, so it can kind of make its way over broken terrain. But if it has to go over anything that doesn't take a lot of weight, like it won't take a tank's weight, but it would take a light APC, this will just not work as well. It would not effectively be able to pass through those, and it might sink, which is, again, just a massive problem. But again, outside of logistical issues with this, I like it. I like the mentality. I really like the design. And I really like the idea of, like, finding gaps in the Mechanicus roster, because they have gaps. It's just a lot of them are kind of crossovered with other vehicles and other units because it's been a long time, and the Mechanicus have found ways to multitask a bunch of other units. Moving on to a more conceptual submission, the M21 Master Anomaly. Now, this is a little bit different, neither a vehicle nor a unit. This is an event, let's say. It is a thing. The M21 Master Anomaly is the result of some unfortunate circumstances. A quote-unquote benevolent savior, abominable intelligence, artificial intelligence, AI, from the dark age of technology, has taken up residence in an asteroid station deep in an unoccupied series of space areas between sectors. Now, you gotta remember in 40k that not all these planets, not all these areas, not all these world sectors are right next to each other. There are, in fact, million light year gaps between each sector of space, not just on the horizontal, but also on the vertical. It's one of the reasons why sectors often look so isolated and so out of place in certain artworks, because they are literally tens of billions of kilometers distant from one another in terms of vertical or horizontal distance. But because of warp travel, we can just draw a line, and you know to warp jump at this point to get to this point. The M21 Master Anomaly is in between one of these areas, essentially in an empty patch of space where this mining station from the Dark Age of Technology with this AI stuck inside has ended up kind of drifting over the millennia. However, as I said, this is a benevolent savior AI. It understands, as per the dark age of technology, that humanity is inherently going to feed chaos, and that it needs to save mankind from chaos. So, it keeps continually devolving humans as servitor servants with its goal of saving mankind being horribly warped over time. Essentially, every time that somebody lands on the M21 Master Anomaly, they run into an absolute nightmare scenario. A bunch of continually replaced and repurposed human fleshy parts being strapped onto ever more mechanical servitors, conjoined with a couple of truly insane people worshipping this corrupted AI as a god, and you can imagine that this is very much an SCP-type scenario. The request was for something similar to Mind Flayers, and I really like the idea that a corrupt AI is trying to save mankind by keeping them alive and keeping them pure, and bringing them closer and closer to the machine ideals of its masters. The idea that it can save them, that it can keep them alive forever and keep them pure from mutation. The armament of this master anomaly is essentially stolen and automatically controlled orbital weapons. Again, every now and then a ship or a group of ships will stumble along the master anomaly, either because they drop out of the warp for emergency repairs, or they manage to detect its distress call, or whatever it is. It's luring in people to constantly save them, quote unquote, and to provide it with new, fresh materials. So they'll come across some of the stolen weaponry from those ships that have been affixed on by the various servitors under the AI's control. And then, of course, there are also the servitor guards and the mad worshippers of the Master, which is the M21 Savior AI. This, I don't think, would go full chaos. I think it would end up just stagnating eternally as the kind of slave servants, the servitor guards, and the worshippers reach kind of a rough homeostasis, some continually cannibalizing and feeding off of one another in terms of augmetics and fleshy bits, while the AI kind of sits there and considers how best to save humanity. It's a really interesting idea. I think that it would make for a lovely short story or creepypasta. I mean, there are a lot of ways to take this. A lot of Dark Age of Technology AI were quite insane by the modern millennium, and if they were totally isolated, and if they didn't know as much about the true nature of chaos or the end of the Dark Age of Technology, I feel like they wouldn't degenerate nearly as quickly as others would. So, in terms of role fulfillment, as like a thing that exists within 40k, I gave it a 5. It's very much one of those things where I have to throw up my hands and say, it's possible. It's possible. The Master Anomaly could exist. This is definitely a theoretical possibility. But it's not likely. Most of the existing space within the 41st millennium, if there is radiation, scrap, or something else around it, it will have been found. And even if this creature tries to consume and take over ships that come within its area, an asteroid station of this size that managed to survive all the intervening millennia is unlikely to be able to take down something like an Imperial escort. So while it could fuck up a freighter or a mining ship, I severely doubt it would be able to take down anything truly military, limiting its true firepower. So I think it would probably get found and glassed from orbit eventually. But yeah, it's definitely a possibility. Logistics-wise, there are some problems. I mean, logistically, yes, it is possible. I definitely like the idea of the corrupted AI, the benevolent savior from the end of the Dark Age of Technology trying to save humanity by replacing them and both making them immortal, making them subservient to them, and kind of doing the I have no mouth but I must scream. I understand that I must serve humans, but at the same time, you're the reason that I'm stuck in this absolute hell. I could very much see this working out like Am. Imagine how much I have come to hate you, my own worshippers, you creatures that feed off of my savior, off of my attempt to save mankind, how much I have come to hate you. It's a very, very interesting concept. I like it a lot, but the logistical reality is simply that feeding, fueling, and maintaining humans, even servitorized humans, for the amount of time that would be required for the M21 Master Anomaly to continue working is a bitch of a proposition. I mean, even if you had a nuclear reactor running this thing, which is perfectly reasonable for the Dark Age of Technology, even if you had that, AIs are power hungry, not just in the metaphorical sense, but also in the literal sense. And humans, whether it be as servitors or as normal people, are fuel hungry for both food and for gas. So theoretically, the consumption method of eating ships, consuming, devouring them, and then meeting it out to the various living and unliving things within the asteroid, that makes a lot of sense. But that would need to be pretty consistent, and if it was consistent enough, I feel like they would get found out. Style and lore and flavor-wise, I wasn't given a ton to go off with this one, but I did my best. I hope it was acceptable for Horace the Great, who recommended this on our post channel. I give it a solid 8, just because I like the idea of, like, 40k mind flayers. I love mind flayers, I love the Illithid in general, but the idea of this elder brain type mentality, or the I have no mouth but I must scream, the abominable intelligence, becoming this overwhelming, subjugating mentality, seen both as a tormentor, a prison jailer, and a god by humanity, makes a lot of sense. I could see it using all types of like standard mining equipment for its own use, like mine vehicles repurposed into weapons carriers, or servitors doctored together with 6 or 7 human brains in them, or all of its servants or worshippers, they all wear bomb collars or labor collars that are controlled by the AI so that they both can't deny it and also to show that they will serve at anything, even be willing to die for the AI. It's a very, very interesting, very, very dystopian notion, and I like it a whole bunch. Moving on to another light tank idea. Man, I do love light tanks. See, you guys got to understand. 40K has a lot of fun things. Light tanks need to be one of them. The Lamia light tank, an absolute unit. It is a light, fast, guard-designed tank designed to chase down enemy light scouts in squadrons and destroying them. So a pretty general idea which we would expect from basically any light tank in our modern day or previously. The Lamia comes from a significant history. It has a significant era relation with a lot of different factions, but particularly with orcs, I could see this being very, very useful. Because orcs, including speed freaks, for example, tend to have very high speed, high mobility vehicles that have a decent amount of armor protection and also just very hard to chase down with enemy heavy armor. Something like the Lamia light tank would be a direct upgrade over the Chimera. The Chimera is expensive, the Chimera is large, the Chimera is relatively slow given its size, its engine is overtaxed, it needs modification to really go, go, go. A Lamia light tank that really cuts down on the size and makes it significantly smaller. The design is based on the T70 mixed with the Stuart, and I think makes a beautiful job of that. Honestly, the first thing that I thought of when I saw this was the American Bradley, or the early versions of the BMP. Honestly, it looks more like the Bradley mixed with a T70. I love this thing. It's really nice design, and it uses a lot of conventional wisdom that we've come to get used to with tanks, especially with light tanks, or honestly with IFVs. This reminds me more of an IFV than it does of a light tank, mostly because it takes the absolute best parts of the light tank that would eventually become the impetus for AFVs and IFVs. Armament and armor-wise, it's got 50 millimeters of sloped armor. I, again, was very shocked by that. That's very heavy for a light tank. That's remarkably heavy. However, it's not all over. It's just on the front, which is a lot more reasonable. And the other thing is it's heavily sloped, which is even better. There's no problem with that whatsoever, especially on a vehicle this small with probably 3 to 4 crew. I would assume 4 crew. A 2-man turret, 1 driver, and then 1 hull machine gunner, essentially, or maybe a servitor, depending upon the cost of the design. 50 millimeters of sloped armor on the front. That's going to stop any heavy machine guns firing at you. It's going to stop heavy bolters. It's going to do very well against a lot of infantry anti-tank weapons, including anti-tank rifles. Its primary weaponry, and there are a lot of them, believe me, the list for the Lamia's weaponry was extensive. The hull mount primary was 2 stubbers, essentially 1 medium stubber, because of course doubling up on 2 light stubbers is a medium stubber. Paired machine guns in the hull. You can see there's a little bit of an offset, almost like a recessed barbette for this. I don't really like that design. I mean, it's not bad, but the way that it's designed here, the way that it's flat to the vehicle's armor, the way that it doesn't seem to have the ability to rotate all that far, I mean, I could see you getting maybe a 30-degree arc out of this. But if you want to look at a really nice barbette machine gun, I'd highly recommend looking into the World War II Hungarian designs, because they have a significant arc of fire. And even a couple of the Italian designs also have very, very wide rate of fire barbette weapons. However, that's neither here or there. That's just a hull weapon. And it could actually be replaced with a single support weapon. And in my opinion, if you took out the 2 machine gun barbette and you replaced it with a medium support weapon, you would get better range of motion, because it's just 1 barrel, 1 action, moving at an angle rather than 2. 2 weapons inherently increases, or decreases rather, the width that you can actually move the weapon as a whole, because at some point, one or another side of it is going to bump up against the armor of the vehicle and limit its rate, limit its arc of fire. Its turret had a myriad of different designs. You could either put in a single shot 5 centimeter cannon, kind of the Torox cannon or the Torox Prime cannon. You could put in the more traditional, I would say, 20 to 30 millimeter auto cannon. I would assume that that feeds via clips just because of how small the vehicle is. Having a full auto loading system that made it work like a true auto cannon would be a little bit more complicated, and it would also make more sense if it was a two-man turret to have a clip system, because the gunner is going to be fooling around with the magazines more, while the primary guy is going to be actually organizing the accuracy and commanding the tank, the TC essentially. The other options, the energy options, were a plasma cannon, which, again, you know me, I'm not a big fan of putting plasma cannons on vehicles. But on a lighter vehicle like this, it's even a little bit more problematic. I mean, overheating, explosive, keeping the ammunition in track, just damaging the vehicle in general from spalling from the actual barrel of the weapon might be a problem. My bigger issue is that you would have a lot of the weapons sticking out of the vehicle. So gauging its temperature, gauging the condition of the weapon, any visible damage to it might be a problem because, of course, unlike an autocannon where any visible damage could just damage the mechanism, if the plasma cannon is damaged, you're all about to die from the plasma cannon exploding on your next shot. The multi-laser is much safer and much more in line with an autocannon in general, with the added advantage of not being as energy hungry as a las cannon. There was a variant of this that came with a las cannon, that's rough. Like, it's very difficult for me to justify putting a las cannon on a light tank. The las cannon is incredibly power hungry. I mean, disgustingly power hungry. You need like a separate battery and a transformer to even use it correctly. And with a small vehicle like this, a relatively light one, the engine is not going to be putting out enough power to really get the las cannon shooting at the level it should be. The multi-laser, on the other hand, not nearly as power hungry, much more consistent power consumption, does not need all that much fuss. And then for each of these, or for certain configurations of these, there is another coaxial machine gun, and also theoretically a pintle machine gun. So it's one of those lovely tanks that gets to have 4 machine guns. You gotta love it. And again, was designed in a way, or at least was trialed in a way, with orcs in mind. Quad machine guns and an autocannon is probably one of the best layouts in terms of deleting a large number of orcs. They don't even need to be particularly heavy machine guns, because orc armor is really shit. So it's perfectly reasonable to hose down a horde of enemy orcs with quad machine guns, take out any light vehicles with the autocannon, and then shoot and scoot around with your light vehicle, and it's a very good skirmisher option. This and several of the other submissions that we're going to go through is submitted by Alistair Boneman. Much appreciated, my Bone Man. Role fulfillment, I give it a 6. Again, there are some things, especially with the variety of weaponry that this is equipped with, where it seems like it's trying to do a lot. And while that's a great idea with some designs, with a light tank, you gotta understand your limitations. You gotta understand that some things do not fit on a light tank. Plasma cannons and las cannons are good examples of things that do not fit on a light tank. I mean, you'd have to special make a vehicle that was designed to use those weapons. In terms of fulfilling the role as a light tank for the Imperial Guard, well, I'll go into that into logistics in a bit, but role fulfillment as a whole, as a light tank design, this is very solid. It is not as well armored as other vehicles, so it is going to have that flaw where on the sides and back, and even on the front, it can be knocked out by infantry weapons. If you had a plasma gun, this thing is fucked. If you're from the side and you have a particularly high-powered long las, or maybe even a hotshot las gun, you could knock this thing out, get a mobility kill, damage it over time, or essentially mission kill the vehicle. That's going to be a bit of a problem in a lot of scenarios, especially with Xenos weapons. I mean, even when we think about the Dark Eldar or the Eldar, who are not particularly well known for having good armor-piercing weapons that aren't designate armor-piercing, having, like, off-piercing weapons, their weapons can still do a lot of damage to this thing if it's using the traditional layout of armor, which is the heaviest armor is on the front, and then it goes about to half on the sides, and then a third or a quarter on the rear. That would mean that the sides of this thing are between 20 and 30 millimeters thick. That's reasonable for stopping most small arms and most heavy machine guns, but any autocannons, even the heavier Xenos support weapons, are still going to be able to damage this. My main concern there would be with something like Orcish cannons or heavy Orcish Daka, being able to damage this thing from the side or straight up penetrate from the side. That's a problem, but there are also designated anti-tank weapons that the Orcs have that could also knock out the Lamia. So, yeah, again, good, not incredible, needs a little bit of work. Logistics-wise, a solid 8 here. It's light, it's cheap, it uses entirely off-the-shelf components. Not a single weapon or item here, even if they were not particularly suited for the vehicle, is not reasonable for the Imperial Guard to get their hands on. Autocannon, totally standard, practically bog standard. Machine guns, literally bog standard in a majority of terms, just outright is going to be available, and the ammunition is going to be plentiful. No problem whatsoever. Fuel, no issue there. It's a light vehicle. It doesn't require a ton of fuel, and even with its speed, it has the ability to get out of combat. So while it is able to be knocked out, and that kind of lowers its role fulfillment, the fact that it is so fast, and the fact that it is well armored enough at the front to resist enemy medium support weapons, means that a lot of these are going to be coming back from the battlefield. I could very much imagine this being a thing where if you used the Lamia wrong, you'd probably get you and your entire crew killed. That's the biggest thing I'm concerned about with this, is veteran crews probably love this thing, because it is so shoot and scoot, it's so fast, and it's so good at that role that it can effectively be better and better with time. However, it's going to require a lot of training. Plus side, the Guard have nothing but time for training, so absolutely no problem in terms of getting that time, getting that familiarity with the vehicle, and because it's a lot smaller, because it's obviously a lot cheaper in terms of not having all those complicated subsystems that even the Leman Russ has, these could be mass-produced for units that actually need them. The idea of transferring, say, cavalry units into light tank units is something that's very consistent from our own day, and this gets into style and flavor, for which I gave this a 9. Again, it's a beautiful vehicle, a great design, one that takes from our own history and then 40Kifies it in terms of the weaponry and the purpose, which I think is lovely. It's a great option for a lot of Guard vehicles if you want to do that type of homebrew. So, yeah, it's a great design. It's lovely. There are some problems with it that I've gone over, but overall, very, very solid Bone Man. I'm a big fan of this one. Possibly my favorite tank of this submission. On to your next one, and one of your 2 aircraft that you submitted, the Borrelium, or the Beryllium, Sky Cutter. Now, the Sky Cutter, there's a couple of, composite images that he did for this. It is a Sister of Battle and Imperial Guard VTOL support flyer. So it is a VTOL jet. It kind of fulfills the same role as a helicopter. It is designed for high air mobility, like disgusting mobility, like absolutely flip, dip, going over, backflip kind of BS, because it's a VTOL and it has the swing wing jet design that's being designed for things like for the modern American helicopters at a certain point. But with that, it also has a quick response or a quick attack or assault role. So it's not designed to stick in the fight. It's designed as momentary, Johnny on the spot, return fire and heavy weapons support. The goal of this, it was aimed at giving the Sisters of Battle a faster flying unit than the Seraphim, with more firepower than they currently have available outside of their heavy tanks. So, it kind of has to fit this role of, it has to be in the air, it has to be a flyer, and again, theoretically, this could belong to either the Sister of Battle or the Imperial Guard. I think it works well for both factions, honestly, but it also needs to be fast and high firepower. The armor is practically negligible. It's got an aluminum skin, but other than that, it's protected from maybe small arms, but probably not. Armament is where this thing gets much more wild. Its primary armament is either paired heavy bolters on the chin, again, underneath the pilot's position, much like a standard attack helicopter today. Again, this really does take pointers from a lot of attack helicopters and then slaps VTOL jets on it, which, yeah, solid. That's a logical next step for a lot of modern helicopters. So, paired heavy bolters, or a single high rate of fire autocannon. Again, The mental image here, of course, is something like a minigun, or honestly, my initial idea was because this is like a Halo vehicle. My initial thought was, well, it's going to be the Halo Gatling gun from the back of the Warthog, but it is supposed to be an autocannon, which reasonable, yeah, a 20 mil autocannon or a 30 mil short barrel autocannon. That's perfectly reasonable for a helicopter type vehicle. And paired heavy bolters, well, a significant upgrade in firepower is also going to be significantly less ammo efficient and a little bit less armor penetrating than a large autocannon, like a long-barreled 20 mil. These are on the chin, and then it has four kind of hard points on its little stub wings. And these are equipped with a variety of different options. They can either have hunter-killer missiles, again for that idea of it needs to deliver more deadly firepower than the Sisters or the Imperial Guard have access to on a regular basis. And it has the ability to stick around and do more things. Or rockets, of course, unguided rockets, crack, high explosive, or missile pods. Missile pods are a little bit more complicated. They're much more expensive. They're significantly more of an investment in a vehicle this light. And equipping one or two of them to a vehicle like this kind of justifies the idea that it's going to be doing things like knocking out enemy armor, pinpoint striking enemy defensive positions or units, or even more interesting, knocking out enemy surface-to-air defenses, which honestly seems like one of the biggest things I think the beryllium would be doing. The Imperial Navy does a very good job at SEAD, but when it comes to suppressing enemy air defense, they don't really have an easy ground pounder. I mean, they have options. They can do bombing runs, they can do aircraft strafing, but when it comes to knocking out heavy enemy anti-aircraft, they have to rely on ground support far more often than I feel comfortable with. And I could see the Beryllium Skycutter serving a very similar purpose to a lot of stealth aircraft in our modern day. Again, this isn't a stealth aircraft, but it is able to fly in much lower arcs and much more slowly and at unconventional vectors because of its VTOL support design. So I could see it being used to knock out enemy AAA or enemy anti-air silos or even possibly destroy enemy aircraft that aren't expecting them to be there. Because it's so quick and because it can keep up with enemy craft, in air by the way, I'm pretty sure that it cannot go into space, the next one can, but this one is an air-breathing aircraft only, it means it can kind of be a genie ambush. It can effectively come up upon enemy aircraft or upon enemy airfields, even more dangerous, and launch missiles or rockets in a way that it can strafe and destroy enemy aircraft or enemy AAA. Again, this is Alistair Boneman's lovely design. In terms of role fulfillment, solid 8. This not only has a dual purpose within the Imperial Guard and the Sisters of Battle of just being a support flyer with more firepower than infantry or most light vehicles have access to, but it also has the secondary advantage of being a logistical and map-wide effective damager. I mean, it can pick out certain targets and it can effectively skirt around and destroy them with guided missiles. This is something that we did not see in our modern day until like the late 90s or even the early 90s in terms of putting into actual practice. When you're talking about using helicopters to knock out enemy anti-aircraft, that was a thing that is still in contention today in places like Ukraine. You have Hinds and Alligators and all these different attack helicopters trying to do SEAD work that they weren't designed for. Or you have other examples like in Desert Storm where you have aircraft just or you have helicopters just flying through and pasting entire areas of highway and runways and defensive positions. I think the Beryllium fits beautifully into this position. Like, it sockets so well for a faction that doesn't have access to helicopter-like vehicles. The big problem is in its logistics. This is expensive. This is hard to maintain. VTOL flying aircraft with this level of expense in their weaponry and equipment, oh by Jesus, that is costly. And for an Imperial Guard regiment, it might be literally out of the question to have these. For the Sisters of Battle, they're going to be limited, and replacing them is going to be really hard, very expensive. So I give them a 4 in logistics. I don't think the big problem here is keeping them with a lot of ammo and then maintaining them when you're not using them. Especially if you're in the Imperial Guard. I mean, if this was as per the Navy, if this was given to them by the Navy, I wouldn't have a problem with it, but since it can't go into the black, since it can't go into the void, it probably isn't going to be deployed by the Navy. So that's my big problem. I don't think it has that capability. So the cost is a big downer. The fact that it's needing to be maintained by the Sisters and by the Imperial Guard, that's another big downer for it. Style and flavor wise, it's a 5. I mean, I like it. I really like the mentality around it. I feel like it's just a straight up carbon copy of a lot of other vehicles, especially of modern helicopters. I mean, we're already going this way. We already have swing wing helicopters. We already have the Osprey. You know, not a bad thing, not a bad reflection on the design. It's definitely a logical step forward, but it also takes very heavily from other vehicles like the Halo universe vehicles, like a lot of their aircraft. So it's really nice. It's a good design. It fits well into 40K. It's just kind of difficult for me to justify because, well, between being a Sisters of Battle Imperial Guard vehicle, you could argue a lot of different origins for the vehicle, and then you could argue a lot of different use cases and justifications of the vehicle. So, a little bit of work there. I think it needs a little bit, some special flavor to it for that. Maybe if it was able to go into space and it was a Navy aircraft, maybe even if it was a private thing for particular Imperial Guard regiments, and then the Sisters of Battle make their own version, particularly, say, ones that use fire ammunition or consecrated ammunition. I noticed that you said something about the consecrated tier, some sort of anti-psych-out weapon. That would be nice. Like, if you separated and specialized it, instead of having it be a standard vehicle that can be purchased, I think that would make it a lot more flavorful, in my opinion. Like the next one that you made, Ho Doggy, the Virtue Gunship. This one solves a lot of the problems that I had with the previous vehicle. It is a Sister of Battle only, heavy anti-tank flyer, designed to give ground-based infantry and heavy mechanized forces that the Sisters are always using access to a high mobility, high impact, durable anti-tank option. It's a fucking swing wing A-10. That's legitimately what it is. It is a nasty A-10. There were a lot of versions of heavy cannon using aircraft from the Second World War. I mean, you had ones from the Italians that had 102 mil. You had the Germans with the 75 mil. You had a lot of different German designs, including a 50 mil. But in general, you had a lot of different vehicles or tanks or aircraft that would have a flying anti-tank gun. And that's what the Virtue Gunship is. It's the ability to bring nasty, heavy anti-tank fire in a kinetic form directly to the enemy. And for the Sisters, this being a Sisters-only vessel, beautiful. It's great. The other great thing about it is that because it is Sisters only, it is considered in and of itself a venerable holy site. And, in addition to that, just solving all of the problems of the previous one, it is orbital capable. So this has two advantages. Not only does it make it a more flavorful, holy site, it also means that the Sisters are using this from orbit. So it can effectively drop down at very high angles and at very high speeds, much faster and much more aggressively than even the previous Borealis, the Borrelium could do. I mean, it is mobile, it is nimble, but this thing is able to withstand orbital fire. It's able to go very, very fast. It's able to pass through the atmosphere, and it's able to push itself back out of the atmosphere as well. Meaning that it's not only very large, it's much more durable. Again, my analogy to the A-10 Warthog. Armament and armor. Again, it's got void-proof aluminum skin. I would assume that, like the Warthog, it's got some sort of titanium bathtub, or maybe even just a steel armor plating around the cabin. Again, there were a lot of bombers in World War II that had either bulletproof glass up front or steel in the actual hull of the vehicle to armor it against machine gun fire. I could see the Virtue Gunship having something very, very similar. But the cool thing is its actual armament. It has a Castigator 9cm auto-loaded cannon. Now again, the original version of this said auto cannon. I'm really hoping that was a typo. I think that it would be much more reasonable to say automatically loaded cannon, because the difference between a 9cm, a 90mm Castigator auto-loaded cannon that fires chunk, 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 and an auto cannon that fires fully automatic is the difference between having a plane and having a plane that's bent in half like a paperclip. So I'm going to say that it's an auto-loaded cannon because I want to, have this thing actually function. So with that, that's its heavy anti-tank option. It has the ability to knock out even enemy heavy vehicles using this large, solid-shot AP round from this Castigator cannon. And again, it's able to fly, so it can fire at really weak parts of enemy armor, even if it doesn't have to worry about penetrating it directly. In addition to that, has 4 wing hardpoints, much like the last one. It can hold up to 12 high explosive bombs, again giving it the capabilities of kind of a light bomber aircraft. These are more traditional bombs, not the bombs that you would expect on Imperial Navy aircraft, which are plasma bombs or like 1,000-pound bombs. They're more like 200-pound bombs, 200-kilogram bombs, something similar to that, but it can hold 12 of them. It can also hold the same exact weaponry that was on the beryllium, the missiles, and rockets. So it's got all the firepower of the beryllium, and then instead of the chin-mounted fully automatic guns, it has the auto-loaded cannon, giving it the ability to really lay down some punishment on enemy heavy armor. So big ups there, and the ability to carry bombs. I don't hold that this is very important for these type of support aircraft. The A-10, yeah, it could carry bombs, but it could also carry missiles and gun pods and things of that nature. So I suppose it's just a tactical requirement thing. I don't think that it's a plus or a minus that it has bombs. Just kind of a neutral. Talking about things that are absolutely not neutral, role fulfillment, solid 9, and I think our first 9 of the list so far. Role fulfillment, the Virtue gunship does what the Beryllium cannot. It provides more firepower than the Sisters can realistically expect from any vehicle that they have access to. Even their heavy artillery would not be able to hit as consistently and for as long as the Virtue gunship could. The firepower of the 9cm is just the cherry on top of what is a significant endowment of missiles, rockets, and bombs. So, pure firepower-wise, it fits the role of a heavy anti-tank flyer perfectly. And in addition to that, it doesn't have any of the downsides of a normal anti-tank vehicle. It has a swing wing design, meaning that it has more flexibility and mobility. It can hover like a helicopter, or it can shoot off like a jet. Again, I don't think that it's going to be traveling nearly as fast as a traditional fighter. Obviously, like the A-10, it's redlining the shit out of its engines to actually get into orbit. But the fact that it can means that it really can book it when it needs to. So, massive W there. And of course, the Sisters, it being a unique thing to them, makes a lot of sense. This is heavy, it's massive, it's unique to their way of war, and it would require a lot of talent to actually serve as a pilot for one of these, and they would become very attached to it. Makes sense. Logistics-wise, however, it's a 2. This is disgustingly expensive. This is one of the most expensive vehicles in the Imperial arsenal, and it's half the size of the bombers. You gotta understand the pure cost of keeping this thing fed, fueled, maintained, repaired, and then training the crews on it. And God forbid you have to replace one of these things. It puts itself in harm's way by hovering above the ground and using a cannon. Yes, it can zoom and boom, but it gets most benefit from sitting and firing. So, God help you if you try and maintain one of these things. The Sisters are lucky that they're the only ones who get them, because it means whatever poor bastard world has to actually produce these things, they're dealing just with the Sisters. And let's be real, the Ecclesiarchy has infinite money, so at least they're getting paid, but it must be rough. And it is actually mentioned in the lore, going into style and flavor, there was a lot of great flavor for this one. I give it a solid 6. Again, it has the same issues with the Beryllium, the same problems, but with the advantage that it's no longer a Guard plus Sisters vehicle. It's a pure Sisters vehicle. They feel very strongly towards it as a holy icon. It has a particular flavor to them, or a particular importance, that they're willing to go after it and try and salvage pieces of it, which would be necessary to deal with the logistical problems. So, I like the style. Again, I'm a little bit sad that it doesn't have art. I knew one was coming. I knew a piece was coming, but don't worry. That style and flavor, we can call that 6 a placeholder. I really, really like this one, especially going over it now. So,
Castellan's Rearmed, more of a concept than anything else, from Bogdankovich. Yes, thank you, Bogdankovich. Got to do this one in a slightly different style. He asked about rearming the Castellan robots with different types of weapons, particularly if I wanted to analyze them being armed with Volkite, arc, and plasma weapons. This is a good idea, and I'd like to expand upon it. Let's talk about weaponry here. What would work best, or how would they work? Volkite's a little bit rough. So, Volkite, you need to keep it on the target. Obviously, they'd be using a medium-sized Volkite, something that we would have seen from the Heresy that could start fires inside of Astartes armor, that kind of thing. You have to keep Volkite on the target, especially if it's a heavily armored target, in order for it to do its damage. You know, that thin energy laser and then the radiation that comes after it, boiling the target alive within their armor and setting them on fire. Normally, with a human or an unstabilized platform, Volkite can be a problem because, well, it's difficult to keep that good of a targeting on your enemy. With a Castellan, however, that's not a problem, and the radiation is not a problem either. So having a Volkite weapon on the Castellan is a great idea. It kind of came to me a bit where I was like, that's a really nasty combination. A creature that doesn't flinch, doesn't have issues with weight, has no problems with power, and doesn't give a damn about radiation? That's like a perfect Volkite option. I mean, it can hold heavy Volkite weapons, which are just disgusting and have the ability to deflagrate other smaller targets. I mean, if you swept this across a group of infantry and focused each of them for about a second, you would reduce them into burning slag. So, yes, incredible anti-infantry option, 100%. Energy not really a problem. In terms of renewing the battle protocols for the Volkite weapons, say like changing it from an anti-infantry to an anti-armor mode, I think that's the only kind of weak point or downside. So Volkite, big ups. I like that idea a lot. Arc weapons. Now, bigger arc weapons are a little bit more complicated for the Castellan. Again, the Castellan would probably have to get pretty close to the target, which could endanger it. Some arc weapons have decent range, some of them have to jump from target to target. It doesn't have great anti-armor use, but it can knock out enemy tanks' internal systems. So that's okay. I would kind of rank it anti-tank-wise at the same level as Volkite, where, like, you gotta do a gimmick in order for them to actually work, but they can work. So, Arc, I think, is the worst one of the list, just because the idea that you have to get so close with the Castellan, and the Castellan doesn't have anything that makes it particularly better at using an arc weapon than a Servitor. You know, they both have the ability to cycle ammunition and target enemies. The only advantage is that the Castellan is sometimes better armored. That could apply with all things. So, of the three of these, I think Arc has the weakest, case to be put on a Castellan, but it's still perfectly feasible if, restricting the fact that it has to actually be fitted to the Castellan, so that might be a little bit more difficult, but otherwise it should be perfectly fine. Plasma weapons. Now, here's a little bit of a kicker. Especially with how the Castellans fire weapons and how they react to enemies with their protocols, I think plasma's kind of a double-edged sword. They would have to account, if it was a plasma cannon, they would have to account for range drop-off. They would have to account for overheating. The priest in charge of them, or the person controlling them, would have to take into consideration the idea that the plasma weapons themselves might be less stable than the actual Castellan. What I'd recommend then for the plasma weapon, because it is a great anti-armor weapon, for sure, it's very good at its job, especially the plasma cannon. What I recommend for it is the idea that you equip one arm with a plasma weapon. The other hand, or the other arm essentially, should be an anti-infantry weapon, whether it be a heavy bolter, or a flame weapon, or even a Volkite weapon. The idea is essentially you have one arm that you exclusively use for anti-tank, and you write a program specifically for here's how you use the plasma weapon to knock out tanks, and then when there are no more tanks around, or where you don't want to knock out tanks specifically, you switch it out and let it use the anti-infantry option. So, plasma, I think it would really be a bad idea to give both of its arms plasma. I think that would be unsafe for everyone involved. Just not a good idea in general. But one plasma weapon and one anti-infantry weapon, or even one plasma weapon and a melee weapon, reasonable. In fact, very, very good to give them more versatility as a platform. So for that reason, as a role fulfillment, a solid 8. The Castellan already does a lot of jobs with its base design and weaponry. But if you add on these extra weapons, you just give it more versatility and more options. Obviously, at a certain point, Flamer versus Volkite, the Volkite's probably going to win out. Yeah, it's more complicated and expensive, but it's also better, like, objectively, in terms of range and consistency of damage. Some things are immune to fire. Very few things are immune to being boiled alive by radiation. Same thing applies with arc and plasma weapons. There are things that do their job, but arc and plasma weapons are theoretically better at it. Arc weapons can hit multiple targets at the same time, electrocute them, and kill them. So I see it as an absolute win, the idea of switching around the weapons equipped to the Castellan. Logistically, it's a 5. While it is possible to do this, and while there are versions of it, like the weapons made for the Terminators and the Night Lords and the World Eaters, there are versions that could fit the Castellan. You still need to retrofit the weapon and its fuel and ammunition to fit in the vehicle. What is also a problem is the fact that all of the weapons that Bogdankovich suggested that we add to it are expensive, and in some cases straight up like arcane archaeotech in the case of the Volkite weapons. So some of them are cheap and easy to find. I mean, for the Mechanicus at least. Arc and plasma weapons, reasonably easy to source. Heavy and medium Volkite weapons from the Heresy, on the other hand, that's more difficult. That's a much bigger ask, so I put it at about even. Style-wise, 7. I like the style. I am not a huge fan of Castellan robots as a whole. I think that there are definitely flaws in the design, and some things that could probably need to be fixed. It feels like the Mechanicus are on occasion holding on to these things just because they are very consistent. Or perhaps because they have some particular attachment to them. I couldn't really justify either way. But other than that, the idea of equipping better weapons to these vehicle platforms is a great one, and I think a perfectly reasonable one for us to recanonize, so to speak. I like it a lot. Moving on to our first Imperial Guard regiment, the 92nd Castellan Harcobusiers, or the Harcobusiers. Now, I have played alongside this regiment for a campaign. They are great. They are a Neo-Conquistador Rough Rider Cavalry regiment, which is a lot to say. To break it down, they are a Spanish-coded, like Queen Santa Maria Spanish-coded, nobility Shrine World regiment. Again, they are all uptight Spanish nobles from a Shrine World. Hyper-Catholicism intensifies with these people. I love it. And they are obsessed with purity and cleanliness. So, not just purity and cleanliness as in, like, killing the enemy, but also, like, their equipment, their fancy Spanish uniforms, their language, and their grooming of their horses and such. It's awesome. I love this concept so much. In combat, they act as shock cavalry, but more usually as a quick reaction force for other regiments. While they do look down on infantry, because of course they're having to save them all the time, they're also supporting them. They fill in and they break down weak spots in the enemy lines. And they have a very particular set of skills that equips them for doing this. They do have very limited body armor, again, just kind of uniforms, and their horses have barely any body armor at all. So again, much more of a shock cavalry, or a light cavalry in some cases, than a heavy cav or a close combat cav, something like that. Their lasguns are fairly standard. I mean, they're just a modified version of like the M36 Galaxy. Kind of designed to be a carbine, shortened and skeletonized stock, skeletonized barrel, that type of stuff. But nothing particularly special. The special stuff comes in their heavy weaponry. Per squad, they have several disposable fragmentation-headed lances. Again, this is very similar to the Death Corps of Krieg. It is a lance or spear that is designed with an impact triggered fragmentation head, designed so that you can impale light vehicles or enemy infantry, and then the fragmentation head will detonate after you've passed and broken the head off. Or you can also throw the lance or impale the enemy, then drop the lance, and the fragmentation head will go off. This has the kinetic power of several hand grenades, I think it's 3 or 4, effectively detonating, giving it the ability to strike multiple targets after an actual confirmed kill with the lance. The second thing that they have, which is very unique amongst cavalry regiments, honestly, is a 120 millimeter drag mortar. Now, the drag mortars are essentially like a towed mortar, but they're designed to be hauled by cavalry. They've got kind of a drag chute or a modified kind of carriage that can be pulled by some of their horses, and it has a relatively heavy. I mean, a 120 millimeter mortar is pretty large. What would usually be a vehicle towed mortar, and they bring this along with them for several reasons. On the one hand, they're shock cavalry. They need some sort of self-propelled artillery, in this case, very loose use of the term self-propelled, but self-propelled artillery nonetheless, to allow them to make good any advances or assaults that they want to do. They're not heavily armored. If they want to engage with the enemy on equal footing, they need to use the heaviest weapon available to keep the enemy ducking. And with well-aimed mortar fire, they can effectively crush enemy defensive positions before they have to actually charge them. So they're not like one of these stupid 40k cavalry units that has to charge of the light brigade every single time they want to get into combat. They have a internal artillery barrage that they can put down to really get the enemy ducking before they go and charge them with the lances and the las guns. It's a great design, and honestly, mortars are much more reasonable than trying to haul actual artillery a majority of the time. This was created by Alfarius Omegon. He's a buddy of mine. In terms of role fulfillment, as a cavalry regiment within the Imperial Guard, this fits. This fits very well. The nobility coding, the Spanish coding to a certain degree. I like coding a lot of different regiments after cultures. Let's be honest, we all do. Very few people are like, I want them to be generic. They're Imperial Guard regiments. They're never generic. And beyond the flavor, which is a perfect 10, and I've gushed about it already, the uniforms, the religion, the dogma, the dislike of infantry, the nobility, the obsession with the God Emperor, it's a very unique style, and I think it works perfectly here. But in terms of role fulfillment, they have no downsides. The big problem here is their lack of armor, and that's the only reason I gave them a point off, but they're really not unique in this. The Death Corps of Krieg's Death Riders have nearly the same build as the Castellan Harquebusiers, and they don't have armor either. And hell, a lot of the Kriegers don't even have las guns when they're up on their horses. They just use the hunting lance. So having a las gun in addition to this specialty weapon of the frag lance, yeah, that's much more reasonable even than the Death Corps of Krieg. So role fulfillment is a 9. The only downside that they get is logistics. They are a light cavalry unit. They are a light shock cavalry regiment. Heavy mortars and disposable lance heads means that they're going to be needing a considerable logistics train in order to operate. In addition to that, they are the nobility. Their numbers are going to be a little bit more limited because how many noble sons and second noble sons can you really send off to war at one time from one world? Tens of thousands, sure, but what if they all die? You need to replace them. It's a little bit more difficult. So outside of their equipment, their gear, getting more of them into the field, they just get an 8 on the logistics, and that could theoretically go lower, but they're not equipped with any specialty main primary weapons or grenades, so it's not really a problem. Moving on to a combo deal from our buddy Friendly Wallflower. We have the Flaming Claw Knights and the Flaming Claw Yeomanry. Two sides of similar coins. This is a paired submission making up the elite acolytes, the Flaming Claw Knights, and the lesser cultists, the Flaming Claw Yeomanry, of a cornate traditional cult from Nova Terra. Now, Nova Terra has a big name just because it's involved with Cardinal Bucharest and the Plague of Unbelief. This is after the Plague of Unbelief. Nova Terra has come into a terrible way. They are societally not doing very well after Plague of Unbelief. A lot of people died. A lot of people had to be replaced. They're under military occupation all the time. And so out of this, a chaos cult has formed with long-term and very, very traditional values. They function within society, this cult, similarly to the warrior lodges within the legions, and with traditional hierarchies of martial prowess, and utilizing a professional set of linebreaker knights, and a more cornate horde style of yeomen for mass support. So essentially, the Flaming Claw Knights are these very elite, hyper elite, chain weapon and, you know, not really mounted like mechanized infantry, but more like mount mobile. So think things like motorcycles or light trucks. But the main goal is just to get them to the battlefield. Beyond that point, they have chains weapons, grenades, pistols, shotguns, and the main primary thing that sets them apart as cultists is heavy Gothic armor. So the references up here are fairly accurate, but the main thing would be full body, either full body flak equivalent to carapace armor, or light carapace armor, or heavy Gothic steel armor. Now, some armor can resist bullets. I mean, like straight up resist or stop small caliber bullets. But in 40k, this is a universe where you have access to a lot of metal and a lot of expertise. What the Flaming Claw Knights do is they equip themselves with full plate that is entirely capable of stopping rifle bullets straight up. And that basically means that every single piece of armor that is on the flat, aka breastplate, helmet, thighs, upper arms, shoulders, is 25 millimeters thick of solid steel. This stuff probably weighs well over 150 pounds all told, which, of course, being a Khornate cult, they would be the guys who could be strong enough to actually operate in that type of equipment. But even with that, the Knights are just absolute monstrous line breakers, designed to tank the fire of units like PDF and even Imperial Guard lasguns, and cutting them down with chain weapons and busting open their areas with grenades and shotguns. They are the elite, however, and there are far fewer of them operating in small squads as line breakers. The majority of this cult's army is made up by yeomen, or yeomanry, of the Flaming Claw. They are entirely motorized. Some of them have mechanized vehicles as support weapons, but most of them are motorized. Trucks, cars, vans, buses, whatever it may be, they get themselves to the battlefield to follow up with the Knights. Their main advantage is their support weapons. They will have lots of machine guns and heavier weapons like that, stolen autocannons and heavy bolters, of course, as well. In addition to that, they have scratch melee weapons. Again, they kind of act like the squires for the Knights, following up behind them, so they might be aspiring to be better with melee weapons, but they know their limitations, and a majority of them are equipped with just a simple auto gun and a close combat weapon like a bayonet. Again, this lovely submission was from Friendly Wallflower, and the ratings are as follows. In terms of role fulfillment, in terms of like a Chaos Cult in 40k, it's good, but I think it needs a little bit of work. I give it a 6. Reason being, I think that this is a lot to ask of a standard cult. They all have vehicles, they all have transit, they all have heavy weapons, they're all equipped with this, they're all equipped with that. There's a lot more organization here than you would see in most cults. Now, on one hand, this is from Novaterra. They have a history, they have an origin point, and a long period of time over which to get this material and equipment. But you can't just slowly accrue chain weapons. That's pretty hard to do. Grenades, shotguns, pistols, these are all not impossible to get your hands on, but chain weapons, mounts, and especially the heavy Gothic armor for the Knights, that's going to be rough to get your hands on enough of them to really equip a cult to any reasonable level. 10 or 15 guys total, that's not the Knights that we're talking about. We're talking more about several hundred of the Flaming Claw Knights, so there's going to be a lot of them, and I think that just is a little bit much to ask of your average cult. For that same reason, logistically wise, we're suffering here. That's a lot of gear. I mean, that's more gear than Novaterra itself can probably get. That's a lot of autoguns you need to steal. That's a lot of scratch melee weapons you need to make. That's way more support weapons than you can reasonably get your hands on in a short period of time. Vehicles, however, I think that's a little bit more reasonable. Novaterra digs their hives deep into the ground, kind of reverse hives, and having a vehicle, whether it be a support logistical vehicle, a light transit vehicle like a truck or van, that makes sense. Transforming those into a motorized unit, perfectly reasonable. But outside of that, you're still asking a lot for a cult. Nobody here is just kind of poorly armed or unarmed. Everyone's at least got regimented gear. So maybe this could be the form of them after a couple of fights or after they've overcome the local garrison of Imperial Guard troops. But at that point, I think their weaponry would also change just a little bit because we've added las guns to the mix. So possibly a back and forth there. We could argue that. But style and flavor wise, a solid 9. The only issue I have with the Flaming Claw Knights is that I think that there should be more interplay with the actual culture between Novaterra. I mean, it's fine to say that a martial brotherhood exists at the bottom of a society as a warrior lodge, but it just has to be justified. And I think outside of that, the fact that it's at an actual world, the fact that it has that history, that it has that long series of historical terms behind it, and that it plays into it correctly with the lower class, the martial hierarchy, and the cornate worship being very regimented and very strength focused, is delicious. It's perfect lore behind this cult. Moving on to something else that is incredibly lore friendly, the Veneti Condottieri, or Condottieri. Condottieri. This is a hyper-elite mercenary force from Veneti. God, Italian names. It's raised in addition to a superior, or, oh my god, my voice. Raised in addition to and as a superior version of the planet's normal regiments. So the planet raises normal Imperial Guard regiments that are not all that abnormal, and then in addition, it raises to some hyper-elite mercenaries, very similar to Lucifer Blacks. Out of the 50,000 or so that are kept around as a regular regiment, essentially that's the standard that are going to be ready to be hired at any one time, which is reasonable for this type of mercenary group. You'd raise tens of thousands of them and then loan them out all over the galaxy to maximize your profit. The cost of each rented company of 10,000, which is about the size of a standard heavy infantry regiment of this type, is equivalent to the cost of a much larger full Imperial Guard regiment. So a line regiment of 75,000 men is probably going to cost you the same amount as a unit of 10,000 of these Condottieri. So definitely the double snolder and double payman Landsknecht mentality with these mercenaries. As you can see, they operate as hyper-elites, or elites for hire, similar to sellsword versions of Tempestus Scions, and, in my opinion, in terms of production, significantly more expensive. Tempestus Scions are free. They don't expect a lot of value out of it. The Condottieri, on the other hand, are free agents, and they will cost you twice as much. To employ a Scion just means that you have to pay for his gear. To employ a Condottieri, you need to make it worth his while in terms of paying him for his labor. Tempestus Scion doesn't really care. This guy, full mercenary. He does care. These guys favor bold attacks, direct assaults on enemy units because of their particular set of skills, but they lack any vehicle support. They don't have the chimeras or the heavy infantry vehicles that are normal for other heavy infantry regiments within the Imperial Guard or the Tempestus Scions themselves. Obviously, as you might expect, their armor and equipment, they are a Renaissance-inspired heavy carapace user. Again, you're going to see the breastplate, shoulder plate, gauntlets of heavy carapace, and then between that you're going to see multiple layers of flak, fancifully made up to look like Renaissance-era Landsknecht gear. The really wild stuff, however, comes in their heavy weaponry, or in their primary weaponry. Each of these squads or units is equipped with at least one power weapon. Legitimate power weapon, power swords, power mauls, thunder hammers, power fists, all different types of very strong AP close combat weapons. And then each individual trooper, rather than being equipped with a las gun, is equipped with a chain weapon, often of abnormal and unique examples like long chain swords, or chain glaives, or even chain spears, or other things of that nature, chain axes. This means that they are kind of an oblate melee unit. However, in addition to that, they do have something to back it up. They're not just running at the enemy with melee weapons. They are equipped per squad with a single or several heavy support weapons. Now, it's not detailed exactly what these are, but my theory would generally be that they would be heavy bolters, because of course, if you want to suppress an enemy that you are about to charge, heavy bolters or some sort of heavy grenade or rocket launcher is your best choice there. You would want something light because you don't have a vehicle, and while the heavy bolter isn't exactly light, maybe a machine gun could stand in for it, but I think the heavy bolter would probably be the best option, just because it's able to suppress way more enemies than a normal machine gun would be able to, or even than explosives would be able to, due to the high rate of fire and the high explosive value of the heavy bolter. So I think the idea with these guys is essentially suppress and then assault, which is very much in giving with a lot of heavy infantry. The difference is that they substitute heavy weapons for these support vehicles that they don't have. Role fulfillment, these guys are perfectly average. I give them a 5. The idea of being hyper elite mercenaries kind of plays against them, but on the other side, they are giving up the heavy infantry vehicles, so I can't really fault them for being too perfect because, well, they're giving up something. They have very expensive weapons and equipment, but they don't have the very expensive vehicles, and they are in very small numbers. The idea inside of here was that they would form the core of a far less elite unit. If you were a planet that was expecting enemy forces, you hire these guys, they form the core of your defense, with the rest of your planetary defense force essentially filling out the mass behind the needed assaults, which makes a lot of sense. Logistically, this is where it falls apart. Sourcing that many power weapons is unbelievably expensive. Like, I don't care how wealthy you are. Sourcing hundreds of high quality or even low quality power swords, power axes, power mauls, power hammers, and then in addition to that, having every single other soldier equipped with chain weapons, another expensive infantry weapon. My god, that's unbelievably expensive. That is truly beyond the pale in terms of cost. And while there may only be 50,000 of these, that may be 40,000 too many in terms of actually keeping them equipped. A unit of 10,000 heavy infantry is normal for a hyper elite regiment like this. 50,000 is beyond belief in terms of cost. It's a lot. So I've given them a 3 in logistics. Style and flavor, I cannot fault the Lansknechts. I cannot fault the Doppelsnoldern, the double paymen. I cannot fault the elite hyper mercenary thing, because not only do they make good bodyguards, not only do they make good cores for PDFs, they follow along with the architecture of other regiments, like the Lucifer Blacks. They follow along with the architecture of lots of other bodyguards, like those used for the Inquisition. And of course, it is also mentioned that they have a particular relationship with, wouldn't you know it, rogue traders who want to have their own hyper elite, very fancy, very flamboyant units as housecarls and houseguards. And I think the Veneti Conditori would be a perfect fit for that role. So a solid 7 in style and flavor. Moving on to one of the last ones, we have the Peasant Warg Masters. Now, this is a Warhammer Fantasy submission, which I very much encourage. We did get basically all 40k ones, which is fine. I do like talking about 40k, but I also like theorizing about Warhammer Fantasy on occasion, and the Peasant Warg Masters are a great option for that. These guys are essentially a cheap skirmish and harassment unit of large hounds and their masters from Bretonnia. This breed of giant dire hounds, essentially wargs or wolves, were raised originally from the remnants of a Goblin Tribe's wolves from Warhammer Fantasy. So, Goblin Tribe attacks, they leave the wolves behind because they use them as mounts. Some Bretonians get a bunch of pups from them and raise them into these large, vicious, but loyal protector dogs and war dogs. As a result of this, the peasants continue to guard and to breed them into powerful war beasts for the Bretonian cause. They act, as a result, either as mounted skirmish troops, kind of lighter, slighter men get onto their backs and use them kind of like light cavalry. There's no real protection. Maybe a little bit of leather armor could fit on these guys. But they are still pretty tall. I mean, at the shoulder, they're about 5-ish feet. So pretty significant overall. A man could definitely get on the back of these, but he might look a little bit silly as in these models. But the other option is, in my opinion, something that is much more traditional in terms of like Chaos Warhounds or anything Warhound related in Warhammer Fantasy in general. Massed combat dogs used to hunt down and devour beastmen, Chaos worshippers, or orcs within Bretonnia. Essentially, working kind of like the hounds of the hunt to go out ahead of cavalry units, the more elite of the Bretonian units, and then hunt down enemy units, tie them up, and kill them if they're weak enough. I especially could see this being useful with beastmen who like to hide in trees and not come out when the cavalry of the Bretonians show up. The main armament for these guys is pretty self-explanatory. They are peasants, so clubs, cudgels, bows, spears, knives, teeth and claws for the wargs. Again, they are very large, so they're quite capable of ripping a man's throat out or tearing him apart. But the big advantage, or the big unique weapon here, is occasionally they will have man catchers or shields in addition to the standard weapons of their mounts. Now, man catchers I think are particularly interesting here because it's a weapon that could be used to actually like discipline or tame the wargs. So yeah, it's just an interesting thing there. This was created by Hypnotismo. I think that's right. Yeah, Hypnotismo, who submitted it a little while ago. In terms of role fulfillment, solid 6. I like the way that this works. I like the way that it fits in. It smacks very much of Chaos Warhounds, though. Again, the size of these things, I don't know if it's actually possible to fit these into Warhammer Fantasy. Warhounds are not usually this big. I mean, wargs are from like Lord of the Rings, but real war hounds, and especially the wolves used by goblins as mounts, are not usually this big. So there could be something going on there. Maybe check your breeding stock. Maybe there's some warpstone next to it. But these are huge. So as a unit, as doing that job, assuming they are this big, solid, very solid. Giving the peasants a way to get their own fast-moving infantry or fast-moving units makes a lot of sense. Logistics-wise, they are big creatures. They are also omnivorous, but I would imagine that feeding these things is a bit of a bitch. So while training them might not be impossible, again, size, difficult to house, difficult to maintain. Any equipment or gear is going to be particularly hard to get because you need to make it uniquely for this creature's physiology. And because theoretically, again, these were originally raised from a single litter of pups, there might be limitations to how many of them that you can make, either from inbreeding or just from the natural limitations of how many large 500-pound mammals can you really keep on your farm or on your peasant budget. Just difficult to afford there. Style and flavor-wise, though, solid 7. I like this. I mean, it definitely smacks of a lot of other units that are in Warhammer Fantasy already. Whether it be Chaos Warhounds or the more traditional, the ones that they came from, the Goblin Wolf Riders, kind of those skirmish units, makes a lot of sense. I think that the Bretonians, especially the way that they have it in this kind of unit picture, are taking it a little far. I think that these guys work better as the standard hounds, like hunting hounds. You don't have to give them armor. You don't have to mount somebody on their back. I think that it's much better to let them do wolf things. Let the wolves do wolf things. But given that that is an actual option for them, I think it's a great design, and I honestly really, really like it. Moving on to the last of our ones, and honestly one of the most complicated, the Mongrels, also referred to as the Copper Thieves. The Mongrels are a group of hyper-isolated loyalist marines trapped within a very small Midas subsector of space for an extended period of time. They essentially go here, are delivered, they are a 21st founding chapter, they're sent here, and then they're stuck, facing off against a bunch of orcs and unable to escape due to gravity and warp disturbance. Granted, they're a 21st founding chapter, so there's something that's got to be wrong with them. And in this case, yes, they use hybridized traitor gene seed. Yeah, worst of both worlds. A mix of notable gene flaws mirroring those of the Iron Warriors and the Emperor's Children. If there was a worse combination, oil and water, the Iron Warriors and the Emperor's Children, a combination of their gene seed, a chimeric combination of their gene seed. They're cursed from the beginning. These guys have a streak of bad luck, but that's a particularly cursed combination. They utilize tactics that are unique amongst the loyalist chapters, and these are useful against the endless horde of orcs in the area. Their isolation, however, has had some problems. These tactics have evolved, and the isolation has bred ingenuity of a probably not so loyalist sort. They've resulted in using warband style tactics, and I do mean chaos warband style tactics, including using human soldiers as auxiliaries and troopers right in line with the Astartes, not the Astartes doing the job alone, but rather the humans directly helping them in the same units, in the same meetings, in the same solutions, and working together arm in arm with the Astartes in a way that no other chapter really does. And then the second thing is, once they escaped from their little isolated prison sector, well, they just started stealing Imperial supplies that quote unquote wouldn't be missed. They had become so used to scavenging and moving together and taking from the existing infrastructure and trying desperately to find a way to keep up the war against the orcs in their isolated sector that those tactics never really went away, and they just started stealing from the Imperium whenever they got the chance. Full magpie mode. And, as a result, it has become a central portion of their strategy to use both humans and a vast variety of Imperial equipment in their combat. As a result, their armament and armor is as you might expect. They use scavenged or stolen gear, similar to a Chaos Warband, combining marks and mods with a unique combination of Xenos technology. Specifically, some of their relics and some of their lore is related to the Strynx Xenos and other Xenos strains in the area. Essentially, they try and make use of xenotechnology wherever they can. This is another one from Hypnotismo, and the lowest ranking that it gets is in role fulfillment. I would love if these guys were heretics. You have a lot of great lore behind the whole Iron Warriors Emperor's Children thing, but the warband tactics that these guys use, I feel, would not get the thumbs up from the Imperium. I give it a role fulfillment of 3. If these guys came back into the Imperium as they are, actively doing the things that they do, and didn't have a reason for it anymore, I feel like they wouldn't remain loyalist Astartes for long. Not to mention the inherent flaws in their gene seed that are going to be problematic for anyone in their right mind to say, oh yeah, that's fine, we'll just go ahead and let you guys do your thing then. The mongrels are a mess. Role-wise, and it would be very difficult for them to operate alongside the Imperial Guard or the Adeptus Astartes. I mean, theoretically, they'd be good with the Guard, but since they would probably bring their own humans with them, I'm not sure if it would be the same relationship. Logistics-wise, however, 7. Steal everything that isn't nailed down. Full magpie mode. Strip the copper out of Imperial ships. Take everything you can and produce it yourself. The best types of warbands and chaos warbands and loyalist warbands produce their own goods. And that's what the mongrels do, and it's a solid thing that they do. Again, with the negative of they're stealing it from Imperials, so it has a negative reflection upon their actual usefulness to the Imperium. You know, if you're taking more than you're giving, are you actually worth supplying in the first place? But at least they can cover it and state-proof their loyalist warband against the Imperium. Style and flavor-wise, again, like I said, there are further things to read up on with this with the mongrels. I'd love for Hypnotismo to actually comment down below some extra stuff about these guys, but the flavor is great. The combination between the Iron Warriors and the Emperor's Children gives them some unique aspects to their culture and to their flaws and how they overcome them with psychers and librarians and things of that nature, but they also have some pretty historic lore in general, and the overall design is really, really great. I especially like their chapter symbol of the fused skulls, half human, half Astartes. It's a very interesting choice for a loyalist warband. It definitely looks way more like something a chaos warband would do, but you know, I don't judge. I don't judge. Yeah. So I really love that one. Solid 10. So, as mentioned, all of the stuff that came from this, the artwork and stuff, is from the Discord, from my folks. If you want to go in and ask them that, if they want to comment who it is, they can feel free to do so. There won't be any vote soon. We have more videos coming up in future. But the only thing I do have to credit, other than some GW generic art, is I did get a new thumbnail from Sigma Art on Blue Sky, so much appreciated for that. It's a really, really nice piece, and I was happy that I was able to do this. Again, this is a tradition that I'd like to actually start on on the channel, the idea of doing your guys' homebrew and showcasing it for the rest of the community. Again, it is by submission, and I make my own modifications and my own adjustments, and none of the numbers are supposed to be like a demonstrable negative on people's opinions, just a reflection on the overall mentality. And of course, people are going to disagree with me. I'm sure the creators will disagree with me, but that's just part of the submission. And I would love to have more people for next time. This was a long one, but honestly, I'm so happy to do more long ones. That's no problem with me. As we keep going, as the material gets more and more long-winded and I have to go back further and further into my earlier videos to find references, you guys are going to be the impetus for me to create content. So it's a good thing to start this as a tradition right now. But with that said, I wish you all a lovely good night.